When I got home that evening, the porch light was flickering again, something I'd promised to fix a week ago and never got around to. A small thing, easily forgotten, yet it suddenly felt like an omen. I stepped over the threshold of our modest bungalow, grocery bags in hand, to find the house silent except for the low hum of the central heat kicking in. That was normal. Everything felt normal. But my stomach had been twisting all day for reasons I couldn't name. My wife, Harper, was supposed to be upstairs working. She'd recently started consulting remotely for a marketing firm out of Denver. Big title, bigger stress. She said it was a temporary contract, though it had already stretched into 6 months. I knew she hated the corporate world, but the money was good and we'd agreed. Just a few more months, then she'd quit and we'd start trying. Trying. That word had taken on new weight for us lately. We weren't just chasing a baby. We were chasing something we'd both admitted, late at night in whispered half-truths, might fix us. I was naive enough to believe that for a while. I left the bags on the kitchen island and took a moment to absorb how sterile the room had become. Everything had its place. The granite counters gleamed, the brushed nickel faucet arched like a silver crane over a sink, so clean it practically reflected the overhead lights. I used to joke that Harper could work for a home staging company. Now I wondered if she was staging our lives for someone else. I padded quietly upstairs to let her know I was back. I wasn't trying to sneak. I just didn't want to interrupt if she was mid-call. As I passed the half-open bedroom door, I caught the tail end of a conversation. Her voice, tight and clipped, not like her usual client voice. No, not yet. He thinks we're still in this. Still doing the whole, let's fix things routine. A man's voice responded, muffled through the speakerphone. Confident. Too familiar. You sure about waiting? You could just end it now. Be done. Not until I get the payout, she said. My breath snagged in my throat. I stood frozen outside the door, staring at the wood grain like it might shift and swallow me whole. I had always feared the worst in flashes, those dark, irrational spirals we all fall into during our worst arguments. But this was no spiral. This was deliberate. Cold. She sighed. He's close to selling the truck. That'll add 10, maybe 12 grand to the account. Once it clears, I'll file. I'm not walking away from 50,000. The voice chuckled. Damn, you're brutal. No, Harper said, with a light laugh I hadn't heard in months. I'm efficient. I stepped back before I realized what I was doing, my heel catching on the edge of the hallway rug. The sound made her pause. There was a beat of silence. Then she said, louder now, I'll call you back. And the line went dead. I was already downstairs by the time she opened the door and called my name. I called out something about needing to grab the eggs from the car. I could hear her walking across the bedroom floor above me, slow and deliberate. I grabbed the keys from the hook and walked out into the cold, leaning against the driver's side door to steady myself. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now I was stunned. Hollow. Like the earth had cracked under me, and I hadn't even noticed the tremors until the floor gave out. Over dinner she smiled and laughed, and asked about my day. I lied. Said work was fine. I asked about hers. She said she had a long call with a difficult client, completely unknowing that I'd been her client in a way, the object of her negotiation. I played the part. Ate my roasted chicken and steamed broccoli like a good husband. Told her I'd look at the porch light in the morning. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing beside me, steady and unburdened. I knew then that whatever we'd had, whatever we'd hoped to build, was gone. All that remained was the scaffold, the illusion of support. In the quiet of 3 a.m., I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Harper thought I was a useful idiot, reliable, emotionally dependent, too gentle to act. That gave me an advantage, and I'd use every second of it. I got up, padded quietly to the den, and pulled open the locked drawer of my file cabinet. Inside was a manila folder marked truck title. I pulled it out and flipped through until I found what I was looking for. The joint savings account summary and the documentation from our will drafting session 2 years ago. Her name was on everything. But she didn't realize I'd kept all the records, all the amendments, every time we'd adjusted or rebalanced our finances. I'd always been the one with the spreadsheets, the budgeting software, the carefully color-coded envelopes for bills and long-term goals. She could betray me, but she wasn't going to outplay me. The next day, while she worked upstairs, I began building my plan. Not out of revenge. Not at first. I just wanted clarity. But clarity turned to strategy, and strategy turned to resolve. That's when I found something else. I was sifting through our shared cloud account, mostly to back up some photos before I started separating assets. Among the folders labeled Vaki 2021 and Pet Pics and Design Ideas, there was one called Invoices. Innocuous enough. But inside were PDFs I'd never seen before, receipts for jewelry I hadn't bought, a deposit on a rental storage unit in a town 30 minutes away, and most surprising of all, a line item labeled Venue Deposit, May 10th. With her email listed as the contact. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was planning a wedding. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle in. The phone call I'd overheard? That wasn't her ending something. That was her lining up the next thing. Her next life. She was already halfway through the transition, moving her pieces across the board while I was still holding out hope we could fix what was broken. And that's when something inside me changed. Something subtle but irreversible. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't even expose her. But I would make damn sure that when she left with exactly what she deserved. And not a dime more. The next morning, I stood in the driveway, watching the frost melt off the windshield of my truck. Harper was already gone, off to co-work at a nearby cafe, which I now assumed meant meeting someone who wasn't just a colleague. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront. I just waved goodbye like nothing had changed, even though everything had. I headed inside and poured myself a cup of black coffee, staring out the kitchen window while the fog lifted off the lawn. She hadn't deleted her search history. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was underestimating me. She'd been looking up wedding venues for months, some in Colorado, some nearby. Every file had been tagged, bookmarked, or copied into that Invoices folder. I hadn't recognized the name of the venue from the May 10th deposit. But it didn't matter. I already had what I needed: receipts, dates, and a growing digital footprint that painted a picture she'd worked hard to hide. That morning I called an old college friend, Jenna. She was now a divorce attorney in private practice, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who had sent a Christmas card last December with a handwritten note saying, "Let's catch up soon." Perfect. I told her it was urgent and deeply personal. She scheduled me for the next afternoon. But something happened that afternoon that nearly derailed everything. Around 3 p.m., I went into the basement to grab an old tax folder from our fireproof lockbox. I had just pulled the box down when I noticed one of the floor tiles was loose in the back corner near the HVAC system. Curious, I pried it up. And that's when I found it, a small, folded piece of lined paper tucked underneath a plastic bag containing several thumb drives. The note was in Harper's handwriting. It was addressed to someone named Gina. "If anything happens, you know where to send these. You can't find out. Not until I'm gone." I stared at it for a long time, then slowly unfolded the bag. Inside were 4 label drives. 2018, therapy logs. 2020, dad's emails. Personal, audio. Images, legal hold. For a second, I didn't understand. Then it clicked. This wasn't about me. These weren't items Harper had hidden to trap or betray me. These were things she'd been hiding from me. Yes, but they were about someone else. Something else entirely. Her father had passed in 2020. She'd been odd about it. Grieving, but tight-lipped. She told me not to bring it up when I once asked about his estate. Now, it looked like there was a whole other side to that story. I plugged the images, legal hold drive into my laptop. There were dozens of photos. Scanned receipts. Insurance documents. Emails between Harper's father and a woman named Karen Jensen, apparently a paralegal at a firm I didn't recognize. There was also a draft of a restraining order, not addressed to Harper. Addressed from her father, against someone I'd never heard of, Robert Keene. Then I opened the folder labeled Audio. The first file was dated March 15th, 2020. A voice memo. It was Harper. Younger sounding. Scared. He found the checks. I told Dad I didn't want to go back, but I don't think he believed me. He thinks it was just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. I need to find a way out before it happens again. I shut the laptop. There was a second life here. One I hadn't even begun to understand. Maybe Harper's betrayal of me was real. But this was something else. Whatever she'd endured, it had scarred her badly enough to squirrel away digital evidence in our basement, to draft a note for a contingency plan. My mind whirled. Was the Harper I knew organized, calculating, distant, just a byproduct of years of hiding trauma? Was the payout she mentioned on the phone part of a broader scheme tied to an inheritance or legal issue? The question hit me hard. Was I part of her exit strategy, or just collateral damage in a war I didn't know she was fighting? That night she came home glowing, claiming she just landed a new contract. Another 6-month gig, she said. She was already talking about what we'd do with the extra income. Maybe finally take that trip to Oregon. I listened. I nodded. But my mind was still in the basement, hearing her frightened voice echo in my ears. She made stir-fry for dinner. Tried to kiss my cheek. I let her. But the way I looked at her had changed. I no longer saw just a liar. I saw a woman walking a tightrope between two collapsing worlds. And I had to figure out whether she was falling toward me or away from me. The next day at Jenna's office, I laid it all out. The receipts, the files, even the new discovery. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You've got leverage. A lot of it. But you need to figure out what your endgame is. Revenge or understanding?" I didn't answer her right away. Because, for the first time, I wasn't sure anymore. For the next week, I played the part of a man in love. Every smile was rehearsed, every glance calculated. Harper continued to live in our home unaware of the storm circling above her. She texted me during the day with heart emojis and questions about dinner. I responded with emojis of my own, jokes about traffic, the occasional "miss you." In truth, I had started sleeping in the guest room. At first, I told her I'd been having back pain. She accepted it without question, even offered to order a new mattress topper. But really, I couldn't bring myself to share a bed with someone whose smile was weaponized, whose hands mapped out escape plans on my back while I slept. I spent my nights cross-referencing Harper's financial records, ones I could still access through our shared tax software, and found what I had expected. Slow, methodical siphoning from our joint savings to an online credit union I hadn't known she used. She created that account years ago, before we were even engaged. It had over $32,000 in it. Every dollar meticulously funneled in small enough increments to avoid attention. She was smart, but not smarter than me. Jenna, my attorney, helped me begin the process of preparing to legally separate assets. We weren't ready to file yet. That would alert Harper and risk tipping the delicate balance I was orchestrating. But the papers were being drawn up, and soon I'd be ready. But the audio files from the basement haunted me. I still hadn't told Jenna about those. Not yet. I was trying to make sense of them myself. I listened to 2 more one night while Harper was in the bath, earbuds buried in my skull like secrets too deep to confess. One was a recording of a phone call between Harper and her father, dated just 3 months before he died. "I need you to understand," she said, voice trembling. "This can't happen again. I won't survive another blow like that." "You're overreacting, Harper," her father replied, voice cold and matter-of-fact. "You always had a flair for dramatics." She was crying in the background, trying not to sob. "I covered for you last time. I kept the files. But I won't be your shield forever. You promised me." I paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt from her in person. And suddenly, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was confused. Conflicted. If her father had been involved in something that required shielding, a crime, an abuse, a scandal, it changed the context of her manipulations. But not the consequences. She was hiding things. Still lying. Still using me. But maybe not entirely out of malice. Maybe out of survival. On Thursday, I followed her. I pretended I had a late work call and left early under the pretense of a Starbucks run. She kissed me goodbye at the door, wearing a hoodie and yoga pants. Just another Thursday. Instead of turning onto the freeway, I parked a few streets over and waited. At exactly 10:17 a.m., her car pulled out of the driveway. I tailed her from 5 cars back, careful to never get too close. She didn't go to the cafe she always talked about. She drove north, out past the industrial district, then turned into a quiet lot in front of a long, low building with no visible signage. It looked like an old community center or medical building. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. At minute 51, she came out with him. Same man from the voice I heard on the phone, I was sure of it. He had that effortless smirk, the kind of confidence that didn't need approval. His hand brushed the small of her back as he opened her car door. She smiled. But it wasn't her work smile. It wasn't the smile she gave to friends, or me, or her mother. It was soft, familiar, intimate. I felt something in my chest turn to ash. I snapped a few photos with my phone, not knowing what I'd do with them yet. Not knowing if I'd even want to look at them again. I drove home before she did, arriving just in time to be back from Starbucks, with 2 lattes in hand. She walked in 20 minutes later, apologizing for being late. I asked how the cafe was. She blinked. Crowded. Loud. I didn't get much done. I smiled and handed her a cup. Still, nice to get out of the house, huh? She nodded, took the coffee, and kissed me on the cheek. You're the best. That night, after she fell asleep on the couch watching the Great British Bake Off, I checked her bag. No receipts. No notes. Just a pair of business cards. One of them said Crescent Ridge Counseling. The other said Jonathan Malloy, Director of Client Care. Now I had a name. I searched him. Nothing flashy. No criminal record. But a recent divorce. And oddly, he was listed as the principal donor on a non-profit foundation launched 2 months ago, the Jensen Fund. Jensen, the name from the paralegal emails on Harper's hidden drive. It was like following threads through a forest only to realize you were spinning yourself into a web. But I wasn't caught. Not yet. And the web wasn't finished. The next day, Harper left for the weekend, a girl's trip, with a college friend, she said. She kissed me goodbye, left her itinerary on the fridge, and even texted photos of herself sipping mimosas in a cabin rental by a lake. But her phone's location, she'd left it on by mistake, showed she never left the city. She was staying at a downtown apartment complex. The same complex where, months ago, she'd said she might get a unit if she ever took an in-office role with the firm. On Saturday, I went to the unit. I didn't knock. I didn't make a scene. I just waited. Sat in my truck with a coffee and stared at the building until, around noon, she walked out with Jonathan Malloy, laughing, holding his hand. She wore a different smile this time. It wasn't coy. It wasn't staged. It was safe. And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't just betrayal. It was escape. And I wasn't just being left behind. I was the last anchor to a version of her life she was trying to bury. Sunday morning began with silence. The kind that doesn't hum with morning routines or the soft rustle of someone moving through a kitchen. Harper was still at the apartment, or the lake house, if you believe the digital illusion she'd carefully curated. I hadn't texted. Hadn't called. I spent the first few hours at the dining room table with every document I'd collected, building out the final timeline. Every lie had its timestamp now. Every transfer, every email, every step she'd taken to quietly dismantle our life was now pinned on my makeshift crime board. My plan, while still flexible, had an endpoint. One Harper would never expect. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. The money, the exit, the clean slate. But I was going to make her work for it. By Monday, the paperwork was complete. Jenna had worked over the weekend with another associate to finalize every page of the dissolution packet. Property lines were drawn. Accounts listed. Our prenup, buried for years in a drawer we both forgot, was now weaponized in my favor. Turns out she had signed away far more than she remembered in exchange for keeping her last name. I scheduled a courier delivery to her lake house address on Monday at noon. I included a simple handwritten note. Let's skip the lies. File these, and we're done. No threats. No anger. Just surgical clarity. She didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next. But I knew she'd gotten it. My read receipt pinged within 15 minutes. Then Wednesday came. It was raining again. The sky hung low, bruised with thunder and cloud. I got home from work early and found Harper's car already in the driveway. Inside, the lights were off, save for the dim kitchen glow. She sat at the island, a bottle of wine in front of her and 2 glasses, only one poured. She didn't look angry. She looked calm. That alone put me on edge. I read everything, she said. Her voice was quiet, devoid of the dramatics I expected. You're really going through with it. I didn't answer. I walked to the fridge, pulled out a water bottle, and leaned against the counter. You knew for how long? She asked. A few weeks, I replied. The call with your boyfriend tipped me off. Her mouth twitched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the counter. Before you decide this is all black and white, she said, you should read this. Inside were notarized affidavits, bank documents, and estate transfer. But the name on the documents wasn't hers. It was Jonathan Malloy's. And then I saw the date. June 4th, 2020. 4 days after her father's death. The estate had originally been left to Harper. All of it. A modest portfolio, a house in upstate New York, and a dormant fund that hadn't been touched in nearly a decade. But 4 days after his death, Harper had signed it all away. Transferred everything to a trust managed by a law firm. And 3 months later, the trust was dissolved, and the assets funneled into a new entity called the Jensen Fund. Jonathan Malloy's name was on that entity as founder, and Harper's wasn't listed anywhere. I didn't cheat on you, she said, softly. Not in the way you think. Then what was that? Holding hands in front of an apartment I didn't know you had. Helping me take back what was stolen. I looked at her, heart pounding. She wasn't being defensive. She was unraveling. Slowly. Precisely. You remember the files you found in the basement? She continued. The audio? The emails? I nodded. My father never believed I was abused, she said. By my uncle. I told him twice. He covered it up both times. Paid him off the first time. Sent me to therapy the second. I felt the air shift. The kitchen suddenly felt colder, tighter. Jonathan's not just a guy I'm sleeping with. He was my father's business partner. After my dad died, he confessed everything. Said he found documents, proof that my father siphoned trust money to hush witnesses. Jonathan wanted to come clean. He offered me the entire fund. I said no. I didn't want blood money. So we started a nonprofit instead, to help kids who went through what I did. I was stunned. Why lie? Why hide it all? Her eyes finally met mine. Because the moment I told you, you'd try to save me. And I didn't want to be saved. I couldn't speak. The version of her I thought I'd understood, the version I'd resented, had just shattered like glass under a dropped hammer. I was going to leave you, she admitted. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I couldn't bring this darkness into your life. I've spent years pretending I'm fine, but I'm not. And I didn't want you rebuilding a life with someone who was still under construction. I sank into the chair opposite her. The silence stretched between us, no longer tense, just full. You never took the money, I said finally. I only moved the funds I earned. Every cent I took was from my freelance work. I logged it all. It's in your packet. My mouth was dry. The wedding venue? She laughed softly. Fundraiser. For the nonprofit. It was Jonathan's idea. I didn't tell you because I thought it would ruin the distance I created. The space I needed. We sat there for a long time. Two strangers sitting in the house they'd built. You still want the divorce? I asked. She stared into her wine. Then nodded. I do. But I want to do it right. And clean. No lawyers. No courtroom grenades. I already paid Jenna. Then let her finish it. But I won't contest anything. It wasn't a twist I ever expected. I'd built my entire emotional survival around believing she was the villain in our story. Now, she was just human. Complicated. Wounded. Trying. But it didn't change the fact that she'd shut me out. That she'd chosen silence over trust. That she had moved out emotionally long before she'd ever left the house. So I said nothing. Just nodded. And she quietly packed her things. The last time I saw Harper was 2 weeks after she moved out. She came back to collect the final boxes from the attic, old yearbooks, seasonal decorations, and a stack of journals I'd never dared to open. She parked across the street, maybe unsure if I'd be there, maybe just respectful of the space I now occupied alone. She wore a raincoat despite the clear sky. Still cautious. Still guarding herself. Her steps were quiet as she crossed the porch. I didn't meet her at the door. I let her knock, waited a few seconds before opening it. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. There was just a strange stillness between us, like an echo of what we used to be. She walked inside like a ghost, barely touching anything, avoiding eye contact as she murmured thanks. I watched her take the stairs slowly, then sat on the couch and listened to her footsteps overhead. When she came back down 20 minutes later, she stood at the base of the stairs, boxes in hand, and finally spoke. I filed yesterday, she said. Signed everything. Your attorney should have it by now. I nodded, unsure what to say. I left the foundation papers in your office, she added. In case you ever want to know where the money went. Or if you want to see the list of kids we've helped. It was then I noticed she hadn't brought Jonathan with her. No car idling at the curb. No shadow in the background waiting to usher her away. She was alone. You didn't have to hide all of it from me, I said, finally. My voice cracked, the first sign of emotion either of us had shown that day. She shook her head. You always wanted to fix things. I needed someone to let me break first. And just like that, I understood. She hadn't left for him. She'd left for herself. For the version of her that had been buried under years of silence, shame, and self-preservation. I stood up and opened the door for her. She paused before stepping through it. Looked back just once. Her eyes held something that might have been gratitude, or regret, or both. This place, she whispered, glancing around the foyer, deserves something good inside it. Then she left. I watched her drive away until the car disappeared over the hill. The house was quiet again. In the weeks that followed, I got used to the solitude. I canceled the subscription meal kits Harper had loved, donated half the furniture, repainted the office. I slept better than I had in months, though dreams still came in pieces, half memories, half what-ifs. Jenna called to confirm the court date. No objections, no hearings, just a clean filing and a quiet ending. She sounded relieved, like she thought I might have wanted to burn it all down. But I didn't. Not anymore. One Saturday, I went into the attic to find an old backpack and came across something I hadn't expected. An envelope tucked under the insulation, inside a box marked, "Don't open until you're ready." It was addressed to me. Inside was a single photo. Us. From years ago. She was mid-laugh, eyes squinting, holding my hand at the summer fair. Behind it, a short letter, written in the curved script I used to recognize instantly. "You always saw me, even when I didn't want to be seen. I hope you never stop doing that, for yourself, for someone else. I didn't know how to hold your love without breaking it. I'm sorry I tried. Thank you for building something with me, even if we couldn't live inside it forever." I sat there for a long time, knees pressed to my chest, letter in one hand, photo in the other. Then I put it all back, sealed the box, and carried it down to the basement. There, under the new water heater, behind the paneling I'd installed just a month ago, I pried open the small hidden nook I'd made with a few strips of spare wood. And I added her letter to the small stack inside. Not out of bitterness, not for revenge, but because I wanted the truth to stay buried here, quietly, respectfully, like a time capsule of a life I once lived. I left the kitchen as it was. Clean, sunlit, sharp lines, and warm wood grain. The kind of kitchen where things felt permanent, even if nothing truly was. When I sold the house 3 months later, I left no warning for the new owners. No message, except for the hidden compartment behind the lower cabinet drawer, the one that required a specific combination of pressure and tilt to reveal. Inside it was one small note, scrawled in black ink. "Build wisely. Some foundations lie." I never looked back once I left. Now, I live in a converted workshop across town. Smaller, quieter, with fewer corners to hide memories in. I rebuilt the porch myself, and the light doesn't flicker anymore. The toolbox sits under the window, untouched most days, but not forgotten. Every so often, I think about her. But mostly, I think about the version of myself that was buried under that marriage, the one that finally got the chance to rise up and breathe again. And for that, I'll always be grateful, even if the house no longer remembers our names.